Hi everyone, I'm Anthony Wilson, your Public Information Officer, and this is a new offering that we're going to begin doing after every City Council meeting. Of course, the City Council meets on the first and third Tuesdays of each month, and afterwards we just want to take a few moments to break down some of what the Council has done during its meeting earlier in the day. Today, there's no doubt that the item that has the most interest, impact, and importance to our community is the enactment of Drought Level 1 watering restrictions. Those will be effective on August the 1st. And here to talk about that with us are two of my favorite colleagues because they're both super sharp at what they do. We have Paulina Levy, who is our Water Conservation Coordinator, and her boss, Allison Struby, who is the Water Utilities Director. Ladies, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, Paulina, let's talk about the restrictions that are going to take effect come August the 1st. What will people be allowed to do? What can they do and what can't they do come August 1st?
So come August 1st, the biggest change is the number of times people can water. So currently in standard conservation, people can water up to twice every 7 days. But come August 1st, they will only be able to water once every 7 days. Now, this actually might not be an issue for your lawn and landscape. It's good to water deeply and intensely once a week. Another restriction that will be in place starting August 1st and is in restriction at the moment is the amount of water. So you should not be watering more than 1 inch per week. And finally, restriction that is in place throughout the whole year is that no runoff, that is water that is on pavement, sidewalks, your driveway, should be running off for more than 150 feet.
And so during this time of the year, from April 1st to October 1st, you're only allowed to water during certain times of the day as well, and those restrictions are still going to be in effect come August 1st as well.
Yes, you are not allowed to water between the hours of noon and 6 p.m. Those are some of the hottest hours of the day, and you'll experience evaporation. So really, you'll just be losing water. It won't be going into your soil. It won't actually be helping your plants.
Now, these watering restrictions under our drought contingency ordinance were triggered by the fact that we are nearing 24 months of available water supply. And when we hit that 24-month mark, then these restrictions are enacted. So, Allison, tell us how that 24-month available water supply is calculated.
We take into account the surface water sources and the hickory production of 1.5 mgd a day. But what we do is we take a snapshot. So as of July 1, we see what those reservoirs are holding at the time. For instance, OH Ivy is at 15% capacity, OC Fisher is at 7%, Twin Buttes is at 9%, and Lake Nazareth is at 81%. We take those volumes and we calculate through time and through evaporation rates that are put out by the Texas Water Development Board how long those reservoirs will last at our current annual production. But evaporation is one of the largest calculations in that months of supply that is depleted or takes away from our surface water. And so that's why we can't just take the volume today and divide it by our annual usage, because at that point we do have over 24 months. But if you take into consideration evaporation and those other factors, we do not have the 4 years that it looks like. We have closer to 24 months of water supply. So as of July 1, we were at 25 months of water supply.
And those evaporation rates, I mean, they're really significant. And talk a little bit about what those are and how those are calculated, how we get those figures.
So the Texas Water Development Board does localized studies in this area. So the evaporation rates aren't for the state of Texas. They are for our area. And for instance, the evaporation rates that we're using are 67 inches a year. In 2011, we saw close to 84 inches of evaporation. In 2016, which was a really wet year, we saw 62 inches of evaporation. So really we're talking over 5 feet of water loss in a reservoir throughout the year from just evaporation.
Now you mentioned that a lake like Ivy is at 15% of its capacity. But what people have to understand is San Angelo's is not the only straw in that drink, that we only get a certain portion of that 15%.
So our contract for Lake Ivy is 15.64% of that volume. It's not a third or even half.
So that's another one of the things that affects what the available water supply is, as well as there comes a point where there still may be water in some of those reservoirs, but our intake pumps are no longer in the water.
Right. So CRMWD, the Colorado River Municipal Water District, is actually who provides Lake Ivy's lifespan and provides it to the city every January and July. So yesterday we received projections from them that Lake Ivy will last until September 2019. At that point, there is still water in the lake, but it is below the pumping levels that can send water to us.
Now, you mentioned that factored into your calculations is 1.5 million gallons per day from the Hickory Aquifer. Now, we've got the capacity to pump and to treat 8 million gallons per day. So why use that 1.5 million gallon calculation as opposed to some other figure up to 8 million gallons?
So currently we bring about 1.5 million gallons of water a day, the minimum production, through the treatment facility. We don't utilize the 8 million gallons because if we don't use our surface water sources, we're going to lose them to evaporation. And one, the surface water sources are a lot easier and cheaper to treat than if we were to pump and treat the full 8 million gallons that we're able to do from the Hickory. So we want to be able to be economical and utilize our surface water sources so that we don't lose them to evaporation. But even 8 million gallons doesn't supply this city completely with water. And so that's why the full 8 is not calculated into the months of water supply.
And that 24 months, now that's a worst case scenario.
Yes.
That factors in no rainfall or no runoff into our reservoirs over the course of that 2 years. But in a very worst case scenario, if we had to rely simply upon the Hickory to supply all of our water needs, it's important right now to bank as much of those water rights as we possibly can should we ever reach the point that we have to rely solely upon Hickory to serve as our water supply.
Correct. So while we aren't utilizing the Hickory at our full annual production, we are banking that water. So in the event that we do, like you said, do not receive that runoff and we rely solely on the Hickory, we need every drop in that aquifer that we can up to our allocation. And so we would utilize banked water to do that.
Now, in addition to the restrictions that Paulina talked about, the other portion of the drought level 1 restrictions is there is a surcharge for users for the based upon the amount of water used, and that will be charged as of August the 1st. So explain how much that surcharge is and how that works.
So it's not a surcharge to your total bill. It is to a certain portion of the water that you use. So it's not, there's a base charge for your water. It won't be applied to that. It'll be applied to your usage charge. And for the users that use 3,000 gallons or less, you won't see a surcharge on there. If you use the 3,000 gallons or more, you're looking at a 5% increase on just those volumetric rates. And if you use more than 16,000 gallons, you're looking at a 10% increase. And if you utilize over 39,000 gallons, you're looking at a 20% increase on those rates, just the volumetric rates, not the total bill.
So in other words, if your total bill that you get each month is $100, you're not all of a sudden going to be paying $105.
Correct.
Because that $100 also includes your sewer service, your trash service, and your stormwater fee.
Correct.
And so you'll just be paying a fraction of that total amount, 5% on that total amount.
Yes.
So are there are other types of users, commercial users, industrial users, agricultural users, do they face the same surcharges?
So the non-residential or commercial will see a 5% on their volumetric charge go up. And then those that have landscape meters will see a 10% increase in those volumetric charges.
Talk about the rationale behind the surcharge.
So we want to make sure that the surcharge is to make sure that people are being truly mindful of their water usage, and that's why those percent or those multipliers increase as you use more water. So we want to make sure that we're curtailing those higher users from mass quantities of water.
And so people, the way I've tried to explain it to people is that the watering restrictions that Paulina talked about, those are mandates. So in other words, I really don't have a choice. I have to water no more than 1 time a week. But the surcharges are more of an incentive to use less water. It's my choice whether or not I'm going to use less water and pay less of a surcharge. So it's more of an encouragement than a mandate.
Yes.
So people ask, speaking of high volume users, why we don't simply just charge the high volume users more for the water that they're using as opposed to charging 5% across the board to most of our water users. So explain a little bit about why we're applying that surcharge to the entire community as opposed to just a few users.
It's not just the high volume users that's caused us to be in this drought. It is because of our reservoir levels and where we are geographically and the rainfall that we've received. And so we aren't penalizing just the high volume users. It's everybody that utilizes water has to realize that we're in a drought and being conservation minded as much as possible. And so that's why some of those lower users are still receiving a multiplier.
Paulina, what are some ways that people can save water and conserve water?
I would say that the first thing people can do is check their sprinklers. So I've noticed that most of the violations reported are because sprinklers are just spraying the wrong area. Go around your yard while your sprinklers are on and make sure that they're spraying the grassy area, not the pavement, driveway, sidewalk. Another thing you can do is raise the blades on your lawnmower just a little bit. If you have a little bit longer grass blades, then they're able to retain water better. Like I said before, it's important to water deeply so that you're growing those deep roots. Deep roots actually allow your plants to come back from a drought better than they would if they had shallow roots. Now, these are all outdoor conservation efforts that people can take, but inside the house, you can also take a lot of efforts. And the first step I would encourage people to take is to check for leaks. Leaks are typically silent and people don't notice they're happening, but they really add up. And so, for example, to check for a leak on your toilet, all you have to do is drop some food coloring in the back tank part and give it some time, 10 minutes or so. And if food coloring seeps into the bowl part of your toilet, then you know there is a leak. Now that's an inexpensive leak that can be fixed. Same with most other leaks throughout the house if they are happening at the outsource. And so those are just some simple ways, but if people would like more tips, they can visit the water website on the city website. And that has a lot more tips and links to other resources.
And to be clear, and I want to stress this as many times as we can because we're seeing a lot of these questions on Facebook, everybody has to adhere to these watering restrictions, including the city of San Angelo and our Parks Department, right?
Right. So there are no exceptions to our drought level 1 ordinance. Everyone has to abide to it because it's important for us to maintain our water supply.
So one of the things I want to explain to our viewers is that we've had some questions about some watering during some of the hot portions of the day at the dog park and at the soccer fields specifically. And one of the things we want folks to know is that our Parks Department, while it adheres to the watering restrictions that everybody must adhere to, they, like everybody else, can apply for and receive a waiver to allow more frequent watering whenever they are establishing new turf. And that was the situation at the dog park and at the soccer fields. They were reseeding some of those areas in order to establish or reestablish turf. That was really important at the soccer fields in order to provide a safe playing surface for the young soccer players who are out there. That waiver is in effect for 28 days. And so since that 28 days has passed at both of those locations, they are now watering under the same schedule that you might have at your home, which is no more than twice a week. Currently, come August 1st, that'll only be once a week, but never between the hours of noon and 6 p.m. So I think it's important for folks to know that the city itself takes these watering restrictions very seriously, and we don't exempt ourselves from those restrictions. So speaking of water, Allison, what are we doing in order to procure more water?
So right now we're really moving forward with expanding the Hickory, as we talked about earlier. We have the ability to pump and treat 8 million gallons. We want to be able to get to the point where we can do our full annual allocation, which would be able to pump and treat 12 million gallons. So the design and everything regarding that project is underway, and we will move forward with it as quickly as possible. We're still a member of the West Texas Water Partnership, and so we want to make sure that we expand our efforts with them. And we have a water supply feasibility study that's being conducted right now. And so the city is making a lot of efforts to make sure that we bring on other supplies or look at additional resources to bring to the city.
So with the Hickory then, that entails not only just being able to pump more than 8 million gallons a day, being able to pump 12 million gallons a day, but also to transport it that 60 miles to our water treatment plant, and then to have the capacity to treat that water at that plant as well.
Yes, so everything would be up to 12 million gallons a day.
And when you talk about the West Texas Water Partnership, I just want to be clear so folks know what that is. That is a coordinated effort between ourselves and the City of Midland and the City of Abilene in order to develop some regional water source that could serve the entire region.
Yes.
And I know that you can't talk a lot about that at this point, but you know, I think it's important that people know that those talks have really been ongoing, and a lot of different options have been studied by those three cities in their joint effort.
Oh yes, we are. We meet regularly with them, and like you said, I can't talk a lot about it, but we are exploring a lot of options.
And one of the things that the water supply study is also looking at is the possibility of some sort of reuse project, whether that's direct or indirect reuse. And so that's something that's very much on the radar screen as well.
Yes, it is. They're evaluating every option that has basically been thrown out for the city of San Angelo and taking into consideration all the aspects of each of those projects.
So Paulina, we talked about the watering restrictions. Where can people go? What can they do if they see a violation, if they see someone watering between the hours of noon and 6 p.m. or after August 1st, if they're watering more than once a week? Where can they go to report such a violation?
Yes, they can visit our website. Again, the water page under the city website has the correct link for them to submit a form. They can also call in, and calling in, that way they can report the violation. Now, it's beneficial for us if there is a photo with it, if possible. That way we can truly, you know, pinpoint what the violation was, when it happened, was it an actual violation as opposed to just word of mouth. So those are all ways that people can report violations. And I would just like to highlight that, you know, hand watering your flower beds on the front of your porch or your house, those are still allowed, you know, up to your discretion. It doesn't have the same restrictions. So I just want people to know that we are talking mainly about sprinkler heads and heavy watering. And
so it's also important for people to know, we've been asked why it is that we don't do more enforcement, and we really rely upon citizen reports and able to pinpoint violations. We don't respond as efficiently when we're just out patrolling aimlessly, our code compliance officers. And so if you will, like Paulina said, go to our water page on our website, or if you want to message us on our Facebook page about a violation that you've seen and include a time, a date, a place, and like she said, a photo as well, then we're happy to pass that information along to our code compliance officers. And I promise you, they do follow up whenever they encounter that sort of situation. So Allison, we've had lots of questions as well about car washes and golf courses and the potential of detainees at Goodfellow Air Force Base. So I want to walk through each one of those as well. Why do we allow car washes to continue to operate in the city limits of San Angelo when we're under drought restrictions?
Most car washes actually recycle their water, and for the total volume that car washes use across the city, it's a very minor and small percentage of our total water usage. We see more water usage going towards irrigation than we do to car washes, but the biggest deal is that most car washes or most all of them, recycle their water, so they have efficient ways of running their operation.
When you talk about more usage on landscapes during the summertime, how does our wintertime usage compare to our summertime water usage?
Right now, we've hit some days here in the summer that have been 17, 18 million gallons, whereas in the wintertime, our usual daily demands are 8 to 9 million gallons.
So we talked about car washes. What about golf courses? Why do we allow, what sort of restrictions are golf courses under, and why do we allow them to water their courses?
So golf courses will be under the same restrictions, no watering between noon to 6. For the large acreage portion of golf courses, the fairways, those type of things, they're under the same restrictions as everybody else. It's only the golf course greens themselves that can be watered daily, but still not between the hours of noon to 6.
I think it is important to note that those golf courses make a huge investment into the greens, and that's one of the considerations under our drought restriction plan. And now about the detainees or the potential of housing detainees at Goodfellow Air Force Base. Do we know what the impact of that's going to be on our water supply?
We are working with the federal government regarding what that impact will be and if it's going to happen. One thing that I do want to make sure that our citizens know is that drought level 1 wasn't triggered by this potential housing of detainees. This was triggered solely, from our water usage and our reservoir levels. And so the potential for detainees at Goodfellow, we're still working with them to understand their operation and what their usage might look like, but it's something we're keeping a very close eye on.
Paulina, at what point would outside watering just be prohibited altogether?
Well, that would be if, like you said, during our calculations of the worst case scenario, our water supply dropped to 12 months. In that case, outside watering would be completely prohibited.
All right. And if people want more information about drought level 1 or watering restrictions or anything having to do with our water utilities department, where's the best place for them to go?
Yes, they can always visit our website. The water conservation page has a lot of information. If anybody has any additional questions, they can feel free to call me.
And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, we encourage you to post them as part of this video. We are trying to respond to as many of those as possible. And so again, if you see a violation, a watering violation, particularly after it occurs August 1st, when outside watering will be restricted to once per week, please feel free to message us on our Facebook page. We'll be happy to pass that along to our code compliance office. Now, the City Council next meets on Tuesday, August the 7th, and sometime later in the day, we will follow up with another council catch-up.